Hello everyone, welcome to today's webcast entitled An Agile Approach to Business Intelligence and Analytics Development. My name is Paul Taylor, I'm a Principal Consultant at Thorogood. My contact details are here on the screen, so feel free to contact me after the event if you so wish. Now, there are various approaches that can be taken to developing software, and so choosing the best methodology seems to always be a hot topic. I've been working with business intelligence and analytics development in different industry sectors for over 20 years, on implementations ranging from short, one or two people engagements to large team, multi-year projects, and so lots of experience of what works well and what doesn't, and also how approaches can be adapted to suit the needs of our customers and their specific requirements. I just want to highlight at this stage that Agile with a small a does not refer to the Agile framework related to iterative approaches to development, which I will talk about later. At Thorogood, we are very familiar with the term Agile in lowercase, relating to agility in the approach that you take and the distinction versus Agile with a capital A. But this distinction may not be clear to others. So when talking about the formal Agile approach, I'll refer to it with a capital A. Today's agenda is a brief introduction to Thorogood, a look at some possible methodologies for implementing software developments, and finally, a look at Thorogood's approach to business intelligence analytics development and why they are different. So let's start with introductions. Thorogood is a global and independent customer-focused business intelligence analytics consulting firm. We operate globally, headquartered in the UK, and have offices in the US, India, Singapore, and Brazil. We focus on a combination of analytical abilities, business focus, and technology to deliver unique solutions to our customers. And our services range from helping customers with their BI and analytics strategies and roadmaps through to the delivery and maintenance of BI and analytics applications. We're an independent company. We partner with who we believe are the key players in the BI and analytics market. And we work with numerous companies specializing across the CPG, pharmaceutical, finance, and insurance sectors. So let's take a look at some of the approaches to software development. Essentially, there are three high-level types of approaches on a spectrum, so range from linear on one side through incremental and iterative on the other side, with some overlap. And we'll look at linear, first of all. I suspect that many people are familiar with a linear approach. The specific number of stages is likely to vary due to some approaches combining analysis and design, for example, and the stages may be referred to using different terms, but it essentially breaks down as we can see here on the screen. It's commonly referred to as a waterfall approach. It's sequential, step-by-step approach to implementation. So at the beginning, the requirements gathering stage involves a documentation of requirements through detailed interactions with users and other stakeholders. An implementation of a pure waterfall approach will capture and document every single requirement, leaving no room for ambiguity, and the document will be signed off by the business before moving on to the next stage. The analysis stage will then produce models to represent the business logic and structures needed to support the implementation of the requirements, and will again produce documentation that will be signed off by the business before moving on to the next stage. The design, build, and test stages will then continue in sequence with no overlap and minimal, if any, interaction with users if the formal method is followed, until user acceptance testing is performed at the very end of the testing phase, moving on to delivery and support once the development is formally accepted by the business. Now, some advantages of taking a linear approach are that it is simple and easy to understand and use. It's easy to manage due to the rigidity of the model. All aspects of the requirement can be considered in initial analysis and design activity. Any technical challenges can be anticipated based on an understanding of the majority of requirements. Therefore, a solid and scalable design should be possible. It accommodates changes to personnel due to the project knowledge residing in documentation rather than key team members. Appropriate use of personnel and resources at various stages of life cycle, so not full-time and not full cost. It easily accommodates changes to requirements and design early in the project before any code is developed. It allows the customer to have early expectations of the overall cost and timelines for the full project, and therefore facilitates commitment to the whole project. And there's clarity from one stage to the next regarding what will be delivered based on documentation sign-off process. Now, some disadvantages of the linear approach are that it has minimal business user involvement between the initial requirements gathering and user acceptance testing stages, and so relative inflexibility to accommodate feedback and change, which is facilitated via formal change control processes. There is large dependency on capturing sufficient requirements at the start of a project. Delivery is likely to be big bang. No deliverables are produced until late in the complete development lifecycle, with minimal visibility of progress for users. It's not suitable where requirements are at a moderate to high risk of changing. Once an application is in the testing stage, it's very costly to go back and change something that was not well thought out in pre-build stages. There is a dependency on stakeholder sign-off at each stage. Insufficient rigor can prove costly later in the process, possibly resulting in deliverables not being what was expected. And the approach to quality during build may be affected due to knowledge of a separate testing phase, which itself may then be compromised in terms of deadlines. Now, as is demonstrated in the diagram on the screen, the linear nature of this approach means that the cost of changing or correcting an aspect of the system will increase as the project moves through the life cycle. Finding and resolving a fundamental design issue during the testing phase can have a huge cost and time impact. Now, common scenarios for using a linear approach are where the project relates to established business processes and outputs with little scope or desire for change. Requirements are understood and easy to document. The project is relatively short, meaning that deliverables are not too far away. Technology is established and understood, so unlikely to be any surprises. The user interface is not too important and therefore not subject to design choices, and there is no business benefit from multiple releases. A single delivery of all functionality is all that's required. Now let's take a look at incremental. So an incremental approach to software development will divide the whole requirement into multiple groups, with each group being delivered in a separate cycle, and each cycle passing through the analysis, design, build and testing phases that were highlighted in the previous section. An initial requirements gathering and planning stage will take place to understand and plan what's possible at the beginning. It's a form of multi-waterfall approach that will deliver fully working software components at the end of each cycle, so earlier than will be the case with a pure waterfall approach, but will only deliver the full application at the end of the last completed incremental cycle. Now, some advantages of an incremental approach are that the initial deliverable will be available sooner and will be less costly than when using a traditional single-release waterfall approach. Risk is spread across multiple deliverables rather than on a single end-of-project release. Opportunities to incorporate change are introduced during interim stages of the project, adding benefit from both a change perspective and also a user experience perspective. Testing smaller increments can be more efficient than testing a complete application, even if the total amount of testing required may increase. Go-no-go decision points are established between increments, especially beneficial in a changing environment. The business case can then be validated each time. It is possible to manage increments in parallel or at least with some form of overlap, and user adoption can be enhanced through the delivery of smaller, easy-to-understand releases. Some disadvantages of an incremental approach are that the total project lifecycle duration is likely to be longer and costs are likely to be higher due to the repeated nature of some aspects of the delivery. Deferring design decisions for requirements that are to be implemented in later increments could have a negative implication retrospectively for design decisions that have already been taken. Unlike linear, where all requirements and design points are considered at the start, each subsequent incremental implementation will require integration with the existing production application, introducing additional testing and deployment overhead. And overhead is also introduced via the need to manage parallel live and development work streams. Due to the overhead of and elapsed time between production environments and deployments, there may be a temptation to cram in functionality to earlier releases in order to avoid delays. Now, common scenarios for using an incremental approach are where the requirements are fully understood at the beginning, but the likely implementation timescales are very long, so there is a desire for earlier visibility. Requirements are fully understood at the beginning, but there's a need to implement a subset of these requirements ahead of the full implementation being completed. For example, legal or market reasons, or maybe time-bound system replacement requirements. Where new or unfamiliar technology is being used, establishing a better understanding of the possibilities of the technology through smaller and quicker releases may lead to better thought-through additional increments. And where there is a possibility that the full project will not get the required commitment to proceed, decisions for additional functionality can be deferred based on the success of earlier phases and the nature of the operating environment. Now let's take a look at iterative. Now, Incremental and iterative are terms that are often interchangeable, with the iterative approach differing mostly in terms of the fact that there are no set steps or activities that are required to be undertaken in sequence. Iterative is less formalized, requiring no formal stage sign-off, and has more cycles, but essentially does the same thing, which is repeatedly continue the implementation process until the deliveries seem to be complete. An iterative approach is likely to include more frequent and smaller releases, with much less time between releases, but also much less additional content from one delivery to the next, with a focus more on building a working prototype and then continual revision through small amounts of additional functionality. Some advantages of an iterative approach are that it's much quicker to complete initial releases of working software with a lower initial delivery cost, earlier and more continuous user involvement, providing more flexibility to incorporate feedback and changes and correct issues, easier to test and debug during a smaller iteration, earlier catching and fixing of errors, and more flexible, less costly to change scope and requirements. Some disadvantages: there is a possible focus on what's easiest to implement first, or on the easiest way of implementing highest priority requirements, rather than the best way. There is a less well-defined foundation in terms of requirement. Analysis and design based only on partial requirements may lead to scalability issues for future changes. Functionality can be quicker and cheaper to implement at times if all requirements are known at the start. For example, an extra field or table that's needed from source for a new report may be more difficult to integrate than if this was known at the start. And there is potential for scope creep due to limited understanding of the requirements at the outset. Common scenarios for using an iterative approach are where requirements are not fully understood and would benefit from prototyping to flesh them out, for the provision of new features where an application has already been implemented and fundamental design issues have already been addressed, where the delivery of specific features is not time critical, and where there is business benefit from regular minor releases. So that was a brief overview of iterative in general, but now let's look at Agile with a capital A, as mentioned earlier, which is a specific application of an iterative approach. Now, the term Agile is used frequently and can relate to a number of slightly different approaches to software development, but it's essentially an umbrella term that relates to a framework of principles and a mindset for the approach taken when developing software, captured in what is known as the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. This was established in 2001 by a group of 17 software developers at a ski resort in Utah in the US, with a goal to provide an alternative to what they saw as cumbersome and unresponsive documentation-driven approaches. The theory being that co-located self-managing teams would deliver better quality products more quickly to users, largely due to their regular communication and feedback loops, unhindered by formality and process. It consists of 4 values and 12 principles, and examples of such approaches and frameworks are rapid application development, extreme programming, lean, Kanban, and Scrum. In summary, the 4 values of the approach are to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. That is, whilst there is value in the items on the right, they value the items on the left more. Now, the approach to implementing Agile that you're probably most familiar with is Scrum. Now, with Scrum, the product is built incrementally in a series of short time periods called sprints, which have a defined length, typically from 1 to 4 weeks, and during each sprint, the Scrum team builds a usable subset of the product, with each product increment being a recognizable, visibly improved working version. The Scrum approach consists of specific roles, artifacts, and ceremonies or activities that work together within each sprint cycle. A team typically has between 5 and 9 members, which consists of the development team and 2 additional key roles: the product owner, who holds a vision for the product, and the Scrum Master, who helps the team best use Scrum to build a product. In terms of the artifacts, the product backlog is a list of requirements for the product in order of priority, and the sprint backlog is the specific list of items from the product backlog chosen for development during the next sprint. And the sprint will use daily meetings and regular reviews to help focus on progress, priorities, and actions. Advantages and disadvantages are very similar to those of iterative, but a little more extreme due to the pureness of the approach. So, in terms of some advantages of the Scrum approach, Commitment is iteration-based, so it helps budget clarity and could end a project at a point where business value seems sufficient rather than all that was originally intended. You're only ever 2 to 4 weeks away from a deliverable of business value. There's more focus on activity and less on documentation, resulting in less perceived waste in each cycle. Team members should be from different business functions, facilitating a multidisciplinary culture that enhances collaboration and can lead to better communication. And regular communication leads to better transparency regarding status, progress and issues, which can lead to more collaborative contributions. Some disadvantages of a Scrum approach are that cost estimates that are based on a number of sprints may not relate to the delivery of the full set of requirements depending on progress in each sprint. Focus on delivering software features on their own does not equal business benefit. Functionality may only be deliverable once core components are completed. The requirement to deliver business value at the end of each sprint will not make sense in all cases. The lack of documentation may lead to future continuity issues. The use of self-managing teams and being responsive to change is a possible excuse and not plan. Think things through and document sufficiently at the start. The use of full-time resources may lead to inefficiencies in terms of utilization versus a linear approach where the timing of activities that may only need certain resources is better understood. It assumes geographical co-location, which can be costly and impractical, and there's a very heavy dependency on the product owner, who is a business person and is likely to also have a day job to attend to during this time. So finally, let's have a quick look at DevOps, which is a natural extension to an iterative approach for implementation. The methodologies described earlier focus mostly on the development lifecycle and not necessarily on optimizing methods of delivery to get products into the hands of users as quickly and seamlessly as possible. DevOps does this by providing a collection of philosophies and combining with technology to streamline the software delivery lifecycle. The term DevOps relates to a merging rather than a separation of development and operations, and the overall aim is to improve collaboration between all stakeholders from planning through delivery and automation of the delivery process. Used properly, these approaches increase efficiency and reliability of development, enabling the team to be more responsive to changes and ultimately reducing the time to realizing value. DevOps consists of these best practices, and just to pick out a few of these: continuous integration and delivery, and infrastructure as code, focus on regular and disciplined merging of tested code that can be deployed for business use as soon as it is ready, using automation as much as possible to make the preparation and configuration of environments as repeatable and streamlined as possible. So to summarize, there is a spectrum of approaches. Now, arguments in the software industry have often pitched linear or waterfall against iterative or agile as almost old school versus new school, and in some instances evil versus good, and the choice of a pure implementation of one or the other. So you either do one or the other, but you can't do both, and nothing in between, no variation on either. Some of the bases of the arguments regarding the inadequacies of one approach versus the other relate to some of the misconceptions about the approaches. So for example, advocates of a Scrum approach to Agile may discount a Waterfall approach because of the lack of user interaction, but users can be involved as much or as little as desired. Similarly, there may be a perception that it's not possible to know all of the requirements at the beginning of the project, and so the final deliverable will not be what was specified originally if you take a linear approach. However, regular communication with customers and an openness to accommodate change via formal processes minimizes this risk. Conversely, those in favor of a traditional waterfall approach may discount Scrum and Agile because of its preference to use full-time resources and co-location and a lack of planning. But these rules can be relaxed if an alternative, less pure approach to Agile is taken, allowing for an initial, more thorough planning phase using geographically dispersed teams who also have other responsibilities, so not utilized full-time. Similarly, a lack of upfront planning may be seen as leading to a poorly designed and poorly performing working software with sticking plaster-like additions in subsequent iterations. However, where there is less clarity up front regarding requirements and technical features, less design and more prototyping can lead to better performing products that more accurately reflect users' changing requirements as they become more familiar with the possibilities. Now, what is of increasing importance to businesses is speed to delivery of what they want, and a waterfall approach is certainly perceived as being much slower to deliver than an iterative approach. This chart reflects a linear approach with some typical timescales, and approximately half of the time taken to deliver is spent testing and releasing after the completion of build. If we take an iterative approach to the development, with some upfront requirements gathering and analysis, maybe with the first iteration not being fit for release, but subsequent ones are, you can see that it's possible to get product into the hands of business users much faster and more frequently, and with an overall shortening of the total timescales due to some efficiencies gained from a DevOps approach. Now let's take a look at Thorogood's approach to business intelligence and analytics developments. First, we need to look at some characteristics of BI and analytics development and why they're different and why they don't fit into any one methodology. The fundamental goal of business intelligence and analytics systems is to bring together multiple disparate sources of information, derive meaning from them, serve up the insights required to meet the business objectives, and do so in a way that's understandable and consumable by the target audience. There is no business process to follow. Users follow thought processes. The data structures must support flexibility and speed. A typical solution will be multi-layered, extracting data from source, transforming the data, storing it in a repository, aligning to standard business definitions, modeling the information to support the reporting and analytical requirements, and delivering analytical models, reports, and dashboards to the end users. The layers must be optimized to work together in the most effective way for the technology set in play, and that satisfies the business goals. Our framework at Thorogood for implementing business intelligence analytics solutions is to use the structure on screen, helping to determine what the requirements should be and what the opportunities could be based on the business goals and the technical possibilities. We believe that keeping business goals to the forefront throughout a project is the key to ensuring success in business intelligence analytics. Technology is a means to delivering value, not an end in itself, and we work from two perspectives to formulate the data structure designs. User interaction to define the dimensions, hierarchies and measures, data sources to understand the entity's relationships, dimensions, etc., and the granularity of the available data sources. Convergence enables the design of reporting and database structures required to best meet the business requirements, and ETL process and data staging structures that will be required in the creation and maintenance of those data structures. Business intelligence analytics projects also require careful project management and scope management. Scoping a project too narrowly can prevent business goals being realized, whilst allowing scope to creep can cause project costs and durations to escalate and focus to be lost. BI&A projects require continued and active engagement with the business and SMEs throughout the life cycle, as requirements are likely to evolve. We use a framework that allows us to apply an appropriate amount of rigor and flexibility according to the customer circumstances. The approach needs to be adaptable to the requirements of the customer and use whichever methodology delivers value in the best possible way. The approach needs to have built-in agility, but doesn't need to be agile with a capital A. For example, the best approach for a full end-to-end BI&A application is not likely to be the same as when implementing a dashboard that sources data from an already established data environment or small changes to an existing application. Our approach to BI&A projects is based on the experience we've built up as a company over 30 years in the BI&A industry. In our experience, there are elements of a pure linear and pure agile approach that are not optimal for BI&A implementations. Our framework is therefore an adaptation of elements of linear and iterative approaches, which combines the strong, solid platform of a linear approach with the agility of an iterative approach. Supported throughout by the PRINCE project management methodology, we ensure a solid foundation at the start by trying to understand as much of the requirement as possible. We then use this understanding to design the system to address all known requirements, which is key to minimizing the need for significant levels of redesign and rework. We then validate the design with users and stakeholders to verify understanding on all sides, and work closely with relevant people throughout the build to get early visibility of the correctness of data, calculations, report content, etc., and refine accordingly. We work with the customer to ensure we implement what they need and what the relevant people that are involved agree is what they need, rather than rigidly implementing what they wanted when the requirements were discussed. And we will look to release fully tested code to a production environment using DevOps best practices as frequently as is feasible and appropriate. This hybrid approach realizes the benefits of aspects of formal methods that best suits business intelligence and analytics applications whilst not hindering development with inappropriate activities. We believe that this approach minimizes customer risk as it ensures that the requirements are as fully understood as possible and also focuses on delivering business value quickly. Now, just a quick word on the PRINCE project management methodology that I mentioned. It stands for Projects in Controlled Environments. It's widely recognized in our industry with a proven track record. It's easily adapted to large and small projects and provides a framework for users as well as developers. So it fits very well with a development approach that's based on regular communication that requires agility. Now, this approach can also be flexed to suit a more linear approach where the customer requirement is more suited to it, and also an incremental approach where a phased delivery will be more beneficial. There may also be scenarios where a blended approach to development may be appropriate. For example, data platforming is suitable to a more linear approach to implementation because the requirements are more likely to be well-defined and documented and not using unproven or unfamiliar technology. The reporting and analysis requirements are likely to be less well understood and would benefit from a more iterative approach to development, taking advantage of prototyping and regular user feedback to refine data presentation, structures and calculations. It may therefore be beneficial to take one approach for the better known requirements and a different approach for the less well known requirements, flexing the methodology to provide additional business focus and agility in areas that would experience the greatest benefit. An example of Thorogood's approach to development is our iterative approach to building dashboards, which is a specific instance of our hybrid approach of gaining an upfront understanding of as much of the requirements as possible and turning this into an initial design and then undergoing multiple iterations in order to achieve a final product, incorporating some aspects of design thinking. So to conclude, there is a spectrum of approaches to develop software. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. A polarized view of which approach works best does not help. Business intelligence and analytics developments are different and do not neatly fit within any single approach. Thorogood takes an agile approach to development with a small a, applying a hybrid of linear and iterative methodologies within a PRINCE project management framework. It's equally adaptable to suit full end-to-end implementations and fast dashboard prototyping. It applies an appropriate amount of rigor and flexibility based on the specific customer requirement, and continuous customer engagement throughout the life cycle is key. So, we'd love to hear from you. If you've got a BI&A program of work or a project in mind, or you're looking to establish organizational best practice and or project management and governance for BI&A implementations, we'd love to share our experiences and help you determine what the best approach for your circumstances might be. So please feel free to contact me via these contact details. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.